Hello, good morning, Be Awesome podcast listeners, follows, subscribers. My name is Joshua Peach. I'm your host here for episode 98. I am without Uncle Dave, but I am not without a guest. And this is a really cool guest. We're in episode 98 of my podcast, but episode 2 of the Be Awesome at BYLR, which is Build Your Life Resume members series for August. The Build Your Life Resume, for those of you that didn't catch last week's episode, is a program created by Jesse Itzler, who is a pretty phenomenal and amazing human being. I'm sure we'll talk about him a little bit in this podcast episode. But there's about 1,500 members, and many of them said that they wanted to be on a podcast to share their story or just see what being on a podcast was like. So I've opened it up to any member for the month of August to just reach out and let me know you want to be on it. And Mark was one of those people. But it wasn't before Mark and I met one another, and this goes down in the 6 lines of separation of Kevin Bacon, or what I will call the 2 lines of separation with David Cooks. A couple of months ago, I was on the membership page, and I saw a post about this guy Mark Resnick, and it was about his book that we're going to talk about, which is titled 10 Days with Dad, which I have right here that I didn't get to read all of, but I plan on it. And it talks about Mark and his family's journey around his father being diagnosed and ultimately passing from Alzheimer's. And I was like, wow, what a cool story. My dad's actually got advanced dementia, which is like Alzheimer's. I think sometimes they don't know which way to diagnose it. And I've been struggling with a number of things the last couple of years. So I took a little bit of a look, and Mark also does promotional selling of promotional items, logoed items, and I had a need for some embroidery. So I sent Mark a message and said, hey, I'd like to talk to you about your merchandise, and I think your book's really cool. We should catch up or connect. And life got away from both of us, and it was about a month and a half, and I'm listening to my friend David Cooks, who's also an author. His book is Getting Undressed from Paralysis to Purpose. I got some copies here I'll talk about later on in the talk. And I'm listening to his podcast, as I often do. And all of a sudden I hear David say, I'd like to welcome guest Mark Resnick. And I'm like, what are the chances that Mark Resnick in Walpole, Massachusetts is talking to David Cooks in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and these two people know each other? So I reach out, and it springs me to reach out. And I said, hey, Mark, this just hit me. I'm listening to my buddy David Cook's podcast, and you're on it, and we need to talk about merchandise and other things. How'd you get on the podcast? And he says, well, David's my brother-in-law. And so small world. David is connected with everyone, even though he's not related to everyone, but definitely connected to everyone. And so lucky to have him in my life and to re-spark this building of a relationship. And over the last week, Mark and I have gotten to know each other, and we're going to dig right into this episode. So I covered the introduction, Mark. Welcome to the Be Awesome podcast. Give us who is Mark Resnick and what does he do? And then we're going to dig right into life with our dads, because I think I'd like to do some storytelling, if you don't mind. And I'm sure a lot of it will revolve around your book, and I'm going to do some random openings.
Yeah, no, that's great. Happy to be here. Thank you so much. Mark Resnick is a 50-year-old guy, grew up in the suburbs of Massachusetts. Hey, we got some family in the house.
Well, Captain Chaos screaming.
Yeah, I think, if I remember correctly, your parents were divorced too?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So my parents divorced when I was 7. The only difference was probably that my father was the one who stayed behind and my mom moved out, which was pretty rare in 1980. So he raised myself and my 2 brothers. I'm the middle child, so I've got the definite classic middle child syndrome in many ways, which we can talk about. We had quite an adventure growing up in Norwell, just a nice suburb outside of Boston. Great schools, great town, great sports. We played hockey most of our lives, actually all of our lives. My dad was a fantastic coach, but it was just quite an adventure growing up with my dad and my 2 brothers in the same house, and not having a mom around was wild in many ways. But it also had some lasting impact as well. You know, just my dad was so busy raising us that it was just hard for him to sort of have I don't think he had the tools really to be the empathetic, compassionate checking in, warm and fuzzy, huggy dad. He was just, his role was served in other ways. But we had a great experience growing up in Norwell. I did personally, anyhow. Great friends, great town. I went to private school. We're talking, you and I, in Massachusetts. I went to a Catholic school, it's Varian Brothers High School, and then off to college at Fairfield University down in Connecticut. I'm married. I have 3 awesome kids. I have 2 in college and 1 at Severian as well. And I've been a professional salesman with my dad when he was alive. We were in business together, and then my 2 brothers joined us. So I've been selling swag, merchandise, promotional products for a very, very long time. Then that's Mark Resnick in a nutshell until my dad gets sick, and then my life kind of flipped upside down a little bit.
The swag guy.
Yeah,
that's a pretty cool title. Yeah, it's funny. So I had Joe Baffia on last week. I'm not sure if you got to listen to the episode.
Yeah, I know.
But I never met Joe in my life, and we had all these wild common threads as the podcast went through. He tried to climb a 14, or I tried to climb a 14. All these things we had no idea about, and learned a lot from one another. It was really cool. I'm an only child, middle child. So right around the same time,
middle child,
only child born by my mother. My mother only had 1 child by natural birth. I have an older stepbrother and sister that never lived with me, but they were older, and there was care for them by my stepfather. And then I have a younger brother that was adopted when I was in 7th grade, who's an amazing young man. I would call him kid because he's my kid brother. But so I have a little bit of only child syndrome and a little bit of middle child syndrome, I think. So it's a weird mix. But so you also I worked with my father. You worked with your father. None of the other siblings got involved, so I could just imagine. Was it the My 3 Sons? I'm thinking of the old sitcom. It was My 3 Sons. Your dad and his 3 sons in the same business together. My dad and I were in the water business, spring water. So we worked with heavy water bottles, 5-gallon bottles, and it was interesting when we would get into a heated discussion, or one of the many times that he would fire me because family businesses don't require HR. Right. That's the one thing that, when you go work for somebody after you work for family, you're like, wait a second, I can't say that. I just can't throw things and have a tantrum and kick stuff. And what is this? This isn't fun.
Yeah, we didn't have that. Thank God. I fought with my brothers, not with my dad. He was chill.
Yeah. My dad was, he was a lesson guy. Like he even if there was something easier for you to do, you had to learn the lesson of the hard work that had to be done by someone. So, an example was we used to have 54 5-gallon bottles stacked 3 high. So you take 18, put a piece of plywood, take 18, put a piece of plywood, take 18, and you would shrink wrap them. 5-gallon bottles, 40 pounds. So you do the math, 54. It's really easy to use a forklift, gas-powered forklift, to pick up those pallets and do all that stuff. My dad started the business a couple of years before me where he didn't have a forklift. So he would say, use the pallet jack. And so I had to use the pallet jack for a period of time before I was allowed to use a forklift, not because of my age or my experience, but just because I had to see what it was like to go through what he went through to get to where he got to, where he got to get in the forklift. And it wasn't mean. I don't think it was mean. I think it was great lesson learning.
Yeah.
I think it was great lesson learning, but I don't know. But family business is not for the faint of heart. Even when you get along well, there's still those trials and tribulations and challenges. I always tell people, like, you probably, I don't know if you did or not, but I always had that ghost of people going, oh, he works with his father or works for his father. What would he be doing if he didn't have his dad, or some others, this silly, stupid stuff where people think it's so much easier to work for family when it's so much harder, because you don't have just the professional obligation to do awesome work. You have the personal obligation of doing awesome work because it carries with you. Thanksgiving dinner is often talked about inventory and truck trips and things like that. So,
but we had a good experience. It wasn't like that thing. It was more of a, first of all, I don't know about you, but I never thought I'd ever work with my dad. Right?
Yeah.
Like, no way. I don't know.
No, I've worked with my dad since I was probably 7 or 8 going into 3rd grade. And my mom met my father. She rented the condo. We moved it back to Easton, and he was the landlord. And
Mm,
they ended up dating and then getting married. And then he made the ultimate decision, which I'm forever grateful for, of adopting me
yeah.
and allowing me to carry his last name. And so, but I worked for my dad as far back as I could remember. He used to he used to flip houses before flipping was cool. So but he would also rent properties. But he'd buy the most beat up
Hmm.
house, and I can remember one in Fitchburg, and it was a legitimate crack shack.
Yeah.
It was a dilapidated drug house, and I can remember being 11 years old and basically tearing the walls apart and working with them. So I worked with my father, reluctantly or voluntarily or involuntarily, since I was about 10. So that was actually most of our relationship, and it wasn't bad. We got to argue with each other. I always say about the HR and all that stuff. It was fun. Like arguing with my dad about stuff was great. We had a great. It taught me a lot, and we'll talk more about that. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to do. So, but let's get into um, Alzheimer's. Before we get into the book, before your dad was sick, what did you know about Alzheimer's and dementia? Did you have an experience, or did you know
Yeah.
much about it?
Zero. I mean,
Yeah.
literally, my wife's family has been vacationing in the Poconos for, I don't know, I think 50 years straight. Honestly, the same third week in July that they've been going to the same resort. And there was one man there that I took a liking to. Such a nice guy. He was a salesman like me. He was, he was a dad. He was just amazing. And he was
Mhm.
the only person I knew. It was one of those things where the next year he was like, you could tell he wasn't himself. And then
Mhm.
found out. And he was the only guy I ever knew who had Alzheimer's or dementia.
Mhm.
Literally, probably until my dad got sick, and then all of a sudden it's just floodgates. Everybody has a story.
Right.
So I didn't know anything about it. Didn't know anything about. I just knew that it was terminal. And
Yeah.
when we got the diagnosis, it was just like, okay, what does that mean? Like, we talking months? We talking years? We talking? I didn't know jack. I had to start over. I just literally had to start over from Google.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had my childhood best friends, who are still my best friends, Terry and Todd Hedrick, twins. Their grandfather, who we called Chief, um, who was a great guy, but he got Alzheimer's, and we were kids, and it was like you didn't you didn't understand what the disease really was, and he was never really in pain. Most of the stuff that happened was kind of, I hate to say it, amusing. It was like every day he had one thing that he did every day. He went and checked the mail every day because he was waiting for, I think, a letter from the president, because he was going back to when it was like he was in, I think, World War II
Oh
or
yeah.
World War One, and he would go to check the mail every day. Their driveway was like 50 feet long. And so one day he's out checking the mail, and some woman, nice as can be, saw this seemingly dazed and confused person and said, "Excuse me, do you know where you live?" And he's like, "Wish to hell he had some," or said one of his coined phrases. And she puts him in the car, and she drives 10 miles to the police department and drops him off because she said he was lost. He was literally at the mailbox 50 feet away, right? And so, but as kids, and it wasn't my family member, you didn't look at it or take the time to go, what exactly is this disease? How does it impact and affect the patient, the person, but also how does it impact the person and the people around them? Because you go through stages, and I don't know if the stages that you went through were similar or not, but you know, we went through the stage of um, my dad was frustrated because he couldn't remember things. Then there was this period where I would get frustrated because I'm like, why isn't he remembering anything?
Mhm.
Then there was the stage that he's gone, like he's here, but he's gone. And then you just have like a constant sadness of like, you see the person, but he's not there. And that's where I'm at
That's
right
where
now.
you're at right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where is he living? Is he in a home or is he?
Yeah, he's in a home. He's been moved a couple of times, but he's in a
Yeah,
home, and he's in a good home now. He's in
yeah,
Westwood, so not too far away.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, it just I was much in the same boat as you. It was like I didn't know anything, and then you have to read up really fast.
yeah,
And it, the, it seems like time goes by really quickly as far as how things progress and how you go. I can remember the last day that I knew that he would never know my name again,
me
right?
too. Yeah,
And
me too.
it's just like, what? So,
I, I
um,
I was very lucky. I spent so much time with him because
yeah,
when he moved out of his house, he was 10 minutes from my home in Sharon.
yeah,
So I literally, I was going to ask you this, but we both worked with our dads,
yep,
had a pretty good relationship. And I tell people all the time, though, I never really knew my dad. I never really knew who he was or what he was about or what his story was until he got sick. Did you? I mean,
yeah,
you're saying your dad taught you a lot of lessons. My dad wasn't like that. So he was a very quiet man and didn't share that much. Did you feel
yeah.
like you knew him
100%.
well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I live in my parents' house. I bought my parents' house. They got divorced in I guess 2005, 2006. And my fiance and bought my parents' house when they got divorced, because it was the beginning of the recession. Nobody was
Mm,
buying, at fair market value, and so it just made sense. My mother and my now 100-year-old grandmother who lived right next door to me, and my 100-year-old grandmother has dementia, but she's rocking. Like she's amazing. Like I saw her
yeah.
yesterday, and I was like, "Hey Lola, I love you," and she's like, "You love me?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course I love you." And she goes, "I love you too," and it's like that's cool, right? She still has some
Yeah.
functionality and stuff. My dad moved a half a mile away, and for a long time, um, my mother and my father got along probably the best they ever got along with. I'm like, you guys should have just stayed married and just lived in separate houses. But I talked to my dad literally every single day from 1996 to this past April. Like he was in a home for since February of 2020, and there were only 4 days that I didn't talk to him.
Big difference.
Literally, it was
Yeah.
it was just every day.
Yeah.
But a lot of my conversation from 1996, when we kind of got into business together, um, to probably 2014, 2015, there wasn't a lot of substance. And my dad was a Vietnam helicopter pilot. He suffered from PTSD. He was in the 101st, known as the tip of the spear. He wasn't affectionate. He wasn't. You very rarely saw. His greatest animation was at Northeastern hockey games when I was a kid, where he would yell at the referees and say, "If you had another eye, you'd be a cyclops." Like he didn't. He didn't. He wasn't an overly animated person, like with excitement or happiness or joy. Um, so yeah, I didn't. It wasn't until he was diagnosed with 2016. I didn't know he was true what his diagnosis was and the severity until almost 2020.
Yeah.
Um, so
Because he had
he hit,
a couple good years of,
yeah,
normalcy, right?
right, yeah,
Before, yeah.
but you know, the what I found was, for whatever reason, I started asking him questions. Like, I don't know if you did this or didn't do this,
Oh, yeah.
for your life, but I forgot to ask my dad a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Like, I took a lot of advice, I listened to things he said, but I never really asked him questions. Why did you do this, or why did you do that, or what was your experience like for this? He was always willing to give me advice,
Yeah.
and most of it I didn't want at the time. Um, but yeah, I forgot to ask questions until probably 2015, 2016. Our house got destroyed in the polar vortex in 2015. And so he built this house. My family built this house.
Yeah.
And so we were kind of talking about, the different things in construction and things that he did. So, um, but it's
Well,
interesting. I think if we had 100 people that all had family members either that are living with dementia, Alzheimer's, or have passed with Alzheimer's or dementia, I think they'd all say the same thing, which is, I didn't know anything about it until, not that it was too late, but before it already was well on its way with us, and the experience was very reactionary. Like, I don't think there's a playbook that says when this happens and they forget their name, this is what you do.
Yeah.
Just people don't talk about it.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I think that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to get my thoughts on paper, was because I didn't want my kids to not know my story.
Right.
And I think what you just said is so true. Like, we don't know anything about the disease. Whether it might not be Alzheimer's, could be Parkinson's, could be cancer. You don't know anything about it. But the point is, how many of us really didn't know our parents other than in their role as a parent? But who were they? You know, what were they like? What were their interests? What were they really like as a person? That's the part that I was a blessing to discover, and that's what you probably went through as well, just to see the other side of this non-professional relationship.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, this is they're not a paid sponsor. I actually don't have any paid sponsors, so that doesn't go against anything. But Storyworth, I would say, if you don't buy a Storyworth subscription for a loved one that's older, at least older, you should absolutely think about doing it. It's about $120, and it is a game changer. So when COVID happened, so my dad got in a car accident in January 2020, and that was a trigger effect of what was to happen of his advancement of dementia. He went into a home. He came out because of COVID and went back in one. He's been in one for the last 2 years. And so for Christmas of 2020, I did some soul searching. And while my mother lives right next door, and my mother's really the only person other than my grandparents, my grandmother, she's the only person that's been with me my entire life. And when I look back at my father and going, I don't know a lot, and I wish I did. And his library's closed. He's not dead, but his library's closed. The information knowledge is gone.
The vault is closed. Yeah.
So I bought a Storyworth subscription, and what that is every week a question is sent to your loved one that you care about. They pick the question. Now, they pick the question and they send the question to you for your approval. But I haven't looked at the questions, but I've looked at a couple of them. So it'll say, did you have a lot of friends as a child? What was your high school experience like? What kind of car? What was your first car, and why did you like it or hate it? Like, there's questions every week that they formulate that the person provides an answer to, and then they put it in book form when it's done after a year. Well,
awesome.
We renewed it a second year. You can do up to like 400 pages. So at the end of this, there's going to be a book that's going to be my mother's story, and it'll have, in essence, 104 questions that I may not or may not have asked, but I'm sure my mother's going to put a lot of stuff in there that I didn't know that would have made sense for me to know.
That is cool. You should, first of all, you should get them as a sponsor, because it's a great product. But it goes with an awesome theme, right? That's such an awesome product, and you're such a good salesman. Just give them a call. Well, as soon as we get off the phone,
Hey, you guys need a sponsor, so I'll give away Storyworth subscriptions every episode.
Yeah,
but it's cool. You can put pictures in there. Like, there's so many pictures that I know were, because of cameras today, it's so different from when we were kids. It's like, when the instant Polaroid came out,
right?
Like, you're waving it like this to see if it's a good photo, but like every picture was a good picture, but you don't know where they are because they're in shoe boxes and other places.
I have no pictures of my dad. It's crazy.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, I don't have, I just, since he got sick, there's no childhood photos. It's crazy.
Yeah. I found a bunch, which I'm very lucky for.
Yeah.
But I've also found a bunch that, they were interesting because I found a bunch that was just me, like that, and it was like they were taking, and I didn't realize that they were proud pictures. They were just taking pictures of, which was cool. And like you, they're not a lot of pictures. I say a bunch, but one photo album worth, not 47,000 pictures like I have in my camera with my kids and, all of every movement we take every day. So I started Be Awesome to write a book. The book was supposed to be Awesome, the Essential Elements of Kicking Ass. But it took me 5 years to graduate high school. Very fortunate to be a fairly well-known keynote speaker quickly, and have been traveling to 46 states, and this podcast and all this other stuff has prevented me from writing. I think I heard or read somewhere that, you were a big journaler. So writing 300, and you did warn me yesterday. I was driving, and I said I'm going to try to get through this book as much as I can before we talk. But it's 340 pages. So don't worry, it's big font. It's easy to read. You'll get through it. I didn't get through it, but I did get to it. And you know, first of all, how hard was it to write this book, and how much of the journaling was helpful in doing that? Because I know there's a lot of people that are going to watch and listen to this that they have a story, they want to share it.
Yeah.
And first steps, best steps. To get to that point. And how long did it take you to write this? Because there's a lot in here, like that 3-part question to you.
Yeah, let me walk you back a little bit. Because of the relationship I had with my parents, which meaning my mom was not around when I was growing up. I mean, she was in my life, but she wasn't in the household. And because my dad wasn't emotional and didn't really ask me these questions, how's your day going, whatever. I didn't have anyone to talk to growing up, especially in middle school, when these things start to get weird and awkward. And I started journaling. Don't ask me how. I just needed something. I just needed pages, somebody to talk to. It sounds crazy, but I was basically just talking to myself in my journal. And I kind of kept that practice up throughout my life. It was just a coping mechanism. Even when I was an adult, I just didn't feel like I had that inner circle that I could just kind of write whatever I want without feeling judgment.
Yeah.
When my dad got sick, I only journaled literally for less than a month. And I realized pretty quickly that there was a story there that just went beyond capturing thoughts. I just started appreciating everything he'd done for me. And we're both part of Jesse's club, the Calendar Club. So I don't know if you've actually had a chance to, is the Muskogee part of the Calendar Club?
Yeah.
Okay.
I haven't picked mine because everybody else is just an animal, and I'm like to get to the end of my driveway and check my mails. Like
no, yours is done. We actually, your Muskogee is to write this book. That's
yeah.
Honestly, I'm not kidding. Your Muskogee is to write this book, and we're gonna have the rough draft done by December 31st. Put that on paper right now. I'm gonna help.
I just wrote it at the bottom of my front page.
So I was journaling. My dad was sick. My life was changing. Like Jesse says, the bus ride is short. And I said, I'm going to write this book. Partly because what I just told you, I want my kids to know my story. But also, as I was writing, I was realizing that, okay, my dad was teaching me things that I never knew he was teaching me. He didn't know he was teaching me. Lessons I learned from him, from hockey, from coaching. And I thought, oh my gosh, what would be the lessons I would want my kids to know when I left this earth? So that was sort of the framework of the book. It's my story. This is how I grew up. This is like you. You grew up with divorced parents. You were dysfunctional. You had your own flaws, limitations, and demons. And then in my dad's story, I tried to capture his story as well. And he was flawed and screwed up and messed up and had his addictions and gambling and drinking and things like that. And then I talked about the sickness because caring for my dad was just life changing. And but I end the book on, inspirational. This is how I got through the darkness of Alzheimer's and COVID. Long story short, to answer your question, it took about 2.5 years to write the book. It took about 10 months to knock out the first draft. And again, I was very motivated. I wanted to write this book I wanted to publish the book before my dad died, which I didn't get to. I was very motivated to write the book, and my Muskogee was to do it as well. They pushed me. My coach pushed me pretty hard on that, and I just cranked it out. And the first draft was garbage, as yours will be too. It'll be terrible.
Yeah.
And then it's like the real deal. Like you can go one of two ways. You can make it a hobby and it'll take you forever, or you can just make it. You have a lot of jobs, but this is for me. It was another job. I sold by day and I wrote at night. I got an editor, and together we hashed together a nice story. I self-published through Amazon, which is amazing. Self-publishing isn't what it used to be 10 years ago. I mean, it's an incredible industry. Literally, when you bought my books aren't sitting on the shelf at Amazon. You bought my book, last week. 2 days later, you had it. It's printed on demand, which means you can upload and change the story anytime you want if you have a typo or anything like that. To answer your question, though, it took writing. I wrote every day. whether it was 5 minutes or 5 hours, I wrote every single day, or at least 6 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
And what I encourage people to do is I also, and you're a coach, so you get this. Like, if you're serious about changing your life, I think a coach is an incredible investment.
Mm-hmm.
You said the Calendar Club was a good investment for you. I actually joined a publishing school, a self-publishing school. I paid for it, and I had a coach there who kept me accountable. And I was a pretty good writer, so I didn't really. They actually can. The school is really designed for people who have no clue how to write, and they walk you through every
Oh, that's
step.
me.
Yeah. So there's a program in place for that kind of keeps you on track. So I followed the program, wrote every day, and honestly, though, it was just such a passion. It was just it wasn't easy. Don't get me wrong. It was hard. The rewrites were incredibly hard. What to keep in, what to keep, and mostly it's hard because who the hell wants to read my story? That's what it is. It's imposter syndrome. It's like, who am I to write a book? But the more you develop that writing muscle, the more confidence you get. And as the story started to come together, I was like, I think I have something here.
Yeah.
So that's how it happened. It's basically, you need like Dave Cook says, you need partnerships, right?
Yeah.
I'm your partner. I'm now your accountability partner.
Yeah.
You and I will get together in Easton and get at the coffee shop, and we'll create.
Yeah. No, that's the reality. And thank you for doing that and sharing, and now giving me my misogi that I've been struggling with. The challenge with my writing of the book is I was originally writing a book called "If You Don't Care, You Don't Count: A Salesperson's Guide to the Importance of Caring About Your Client," because there's so many bad salespeople, mostly because there's bad sales leaders. I used to blame salespeople, but sales leaders have become profit before people all over the place, and they're just terrible. Like, they don't have any engagement with clients, and I'll tell people that. And I lose business consulting for companies when I'm like, if you want to do better, your sales leader actually has to talk to a client. They actually have to see what the client goes through. They have to understand the client journey. Don't just look at a spreadsheet or read a sales book and say, this is what you do. So that's how I started. And when I started going down that path, I was becoming very insultory. And one of my mentors, and someone that's been with me since he actually created Be Awesome, because I used to say Be Awesome and I had the shirts done before and everything else. He woke up one morning, he's like, that's it. It's Be Awesome, the essential elements of kicking ass. And it started out as my story. And as I started going through this and meeting you, and I've met some others, and one of the other members, Jen, who I haven't had a chance to talk to, but she might be on the podcast on Friday. She'll be the first woman to climb the 7 highest mountains in 7 continents and has 7 kids. And I sit here and go, I could write a book about all the people that I get to meet, and random people. Like, I was on a flight from Albuquerque, and this woman raises her arm like this, and she's got the word breathe and periodic elements right here in a story about suicide awareness or Santa Claus. I sit here and go, that's what I should write a book about, like engagement with people, because you care about people.
Yeah.
And just look at people as humans and care about them. Maybe that's what it is. So my struggle has been, what do I put in the book? But back to your book, because you struck a chord. I'm getting a little emotional here, because I when you said you wanted to have the book done before your father died, was it because did you get to say thank you to your father while he was still like cognizant and before he had Alzheimer's? Like, did you get a chance to just say, thank you for being my friend? Did my dad, did you get that opportunity?
It's a tough question to answer. I shared 200 meals and 600 cups of coffee with my dad during his sickness. And I don't know if I can honestly say that I said thank you that way, that he knew. Again, I'm like torn about this, because I don't know if I literally looked him in the eyes and said, Dad, I just want to thank you for everything you did for me. I love you so much. And I would say I love you all the time, but I don't know if I actually said that until he was like on his deathbed, like literally the day he died.
Yeah.
When I almost died in my arms, I was crying and saying, Dad, it's time to go. You did so well. I'm so proud of you. Thank you so much. My brother, Bill and I and John, we love you. Everything you did for us was so great. Did he hear me? I have no idea. Yeah. So simple answer is I probably didn't. As soon as as soon as he got sick, I don't know what it is. Like, it's just one of those, it's not a man or emotional thing. It's just hard to do.
Yeah.
So I wish I had, is what I'm telling you.
Yeah. I didn't. I
Yeah.
haven't.
Yeah.
Even though I know that he most likely will not understand what I've said, I haven't. I know that I lived my life to have acceptance and hopefully some admiration from him, and appreciate that he knew that I appreciate all he did by my actions. But I never, it wasn't until after he got really, really sick that I go, wow, I never actually sat down and said, you know, you had a choice in life. You didn't have to adopt me. You didn't have to give me the opportunity to have the greatest last name known to man that makes it seem like I'm in a witness protection program. You didn't have to, teach me the lessons, and you didn't have to have the patience or impatience that you've had with me, and so many different things. Like, I was thinking about this morning before coming on, and I'm like, what's a great memory or lesson that my dad taught me that I had no idea about, that took me years and years to go, oh, that's why he did it. And I was like 9 years old. We were in Cape Breton. We'd go to Cape Breton all the time, every summer. It's where his family was from. And we went to this cove, and it was in the middle of nowhere. You literally had to walk 40 minutes. Back then, you didn't have phones or anything. You had to talk to one another, walk through all this treacherous terrain, and then you went down this nasty ravine. I mean, it was probably 100 feet down, and it was just this cool beach, all rocks, and big waves. You would never take your 9-year-old down this today without a bubble around him. But when we got down there, there was a bluff out to the end, and there were lobster traps with the rope connected to the rock. And my dad went over and he cut all the ropes. And I was like, why did my dad cut all the ropes? And I'm like, Dad, what are you doing? He goes, these aren't lobster fishermen. These people are poaching. And so he just didn't even think twice about it and cut the ropes. And I'm sitting there going, man, my dad's a badass. Like, 9 years old. Like, he just doesn't care. Like, look at him go. And what we didn't know is that the poachers were actually at the top of the bluff coming down to check their traps. And they saw my father do this. And they started dropping rocks down. It was one of those scared for my life things.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until years later that my dad would say, he would tell me things like, if you do something wrong and you don't know what's wrong, doesn't make it not wrong. It's still wrong, and to do the right things. And, he had fishermen and family members that lived their life by doing things the right way. And people shouldn't get a right to do things the wrong way. And if you have an opportunity to stop it, you should. Should he have cut the ropes? I don't know. I don't know that I would have in the position we were in, but that was his lack of thought of doing things. But I have like 100 of those experiences where I go, oh, I didn't say thank you. And, the hard part for me, and my mother might be listening to this, I still haven't been able to figure out the words to say thank you to her. Like, I've tried, but I struggle, and I think we all do. And then we get to that point at the end and we go, we didn't get to do that. And so when you said I wanted to do the book before he passed, I sit there and go, maybe sometimes it's easier to just write something and say, here, thank you, even though he was in his stage of dementia. That's the Alzheimer's. My friend Bob Bogardus, who's 80, he's got a baseball field named in his honor, in his name. And when he called me, he asked me to come to the honoring, the unveiling of the sign. I said, Bob, do they know you're not dead? and he says, what? I said, I don't know anybody that gets a recognition of a field or a bench or a flagpole or anything that isn't already dead.
Right.
And since then, I've been trying to say, and I'm like I say, I'm the worst culprit. There's so many people on my list that I need to say thank you to. And so, that was kind of where I thought that book thing is. And it's not just saying thank you. I think it's that head nod of like, hey, thanks, I appreciate you, and the person goes, wow, you make me feel good. Doesn't need to be like a long drawn out thing.
No, and you were lucky, I think, in some ways, because you had specific examples of you saw your dad in action doing something that you remembered. I didn't have that experience. I don't have memories of looking back and saying, oh, this is what I learned from my dad when he did this.
Yeah.
My dad taught me stuff behind the scenes, like
Mm-hmm.
just his kindness,
Mm-hmm.
how he treated people
Yep.
was amazing. Like he was just such a gentle soul. He never looked past people.
Yep.
He wasn't phony. So those are the lessons that I learned from him
Yeah.
that I'm trying to, that in the book I, share with my kids basically, and saying these are my 10 commandments of living, that some of them which I learned from my dad, just watching him, not
Yeah.
necessarily a specific moment, but you got, I mean, I don't want to flip too much, but you got a lot of material.
Yeah.
And I think what happens is they say like great is the enemy of good, and
Mm-hmm.
perfection is like the enemy of doing. Like it doesn't have to be perfect. We just have to start.
Yeah.
And that's part of the message of the book too, is like, don't wait for tragedy. Don't wait for a life altering event to change your life.
Mm-hmm.
It's never too late or early to change or to pursue your passion. So, it doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to start. If you
Yeah.
want to lose weight, just do 5 push-ups a day or go for a 1-minute walk. You
Yep.
want to meditate, just do it for a minute a day. You don't have to jump right in like you and I are ADHD and go all in and say, okay, 30 minutes a day, we're going to do this. It's not going to work.
Right. Yeah. The you hit something with, as far as your examples and kind of behind the scenes, um that I think that how do you do that? How do you do that with intention with your kids? Like, do you do a lot of stuff where you go, oh, this is something like in your brain, does it process and it's something that you go, oh yeah, I learned this from my dad, and this is how you're supposed, because behind like doing stuff behind a curtain,
Mm,
it's hard. Like my grandfather used to always say, that the saying that every grandfather would say, which is, character is what you do when no one is looking. But in today's world, and our kids' world, now you've got older kids. I've got a 15-year-old and a 4-year-old, and social media
mm,
and highlight reels that everybody's life is so awesome and fantastic, and all of these,
yeah.
philanthropic efforts, crossing the old lady across the street, and there's 7 cameras set up, and
Yeah.
look at what this person did. Um, what were some of your, I guess, learning lessons and teaching lessons of the importance? My kid, fortunately for me, my kids are naturally just awesome kids. Like my 15-year-old is 6'3" and 210 pounds, size 14 foot, and he is a gentle giant. And if someone were picked on, I was watching the Burger King Whopper Jr. commercial from a couple of years ago, and it said that 12% of people um, stood up for a kid that was getting bullied in a Burger King, and 95% of people complained about their Whopper Jr. being bullied. I don't know if you saw that, but
No.
I have. I'll put the link in, but I know my son Danny would be in the 12%. I know that he would. He'd always stick up for the underdog. He just naturally did it. But in trying to teach my kids lessons of the importance of doing things when nobody is looking for the sake of doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that was instilled by my dad and by my mom, and my grandparents. I sometimes I just sit here and go, well, what could I do differently, or how could I communicate it? Because like the lobster trap, it took me years. It took me years to be able to say that's why he did it, because he never told me. I don't know if your dad probably didn't say, this is what I did and here's why I did it. He just
Never.
did it, and you had to figure it out. And
Yeah.
I'm trying to sit here and say, how do I do it, and do it so that they don't get to this? Well, that's my dad telling me to do it, and realize that the importance. Here's the importance of why we cut those lobster traps, not
Yeah.
because my dad's a badass.
Yeah. I don't know if you necessarily have to have those specific experiences. I mean, and like literally cutting ropes. I just know that, like you, I feel my kids are different. I feel like they're very respectful, and I think that's just the parents, right? It's just watching your parents
Hmm.
be good people and do the right thing. I
Yep.
mean, that's to me, it's as simple as that. And I think when you see like your friends, your kids' friends, and you know who's a brat and who's a jerk, and you look at their parents and you're like, oh, that's why, Um, I just think we live a certain principle.
Yeah.
We try, and like in the book when you go to the end, these 10 commandments. I think it's like around page 250. I just laid them out. I just 1 through 10. And I didn't plan this out, honestly, Josh.
Mhm.
I didn't. This kind of happened by accident because my dad was a hockey coach, and he had
Mhm.
these hockey commandments that we would recite before every single game.
Mhm.
I don't know how he got us to do it because no coach in their right mind could get a team of today's youth to do it.
Yep.
But in the locker room as a kid, he would hand out these Xerox sheets, and one kid would be assigned to read the commandment. And I will skate or I'll keep two hands on my stick and my stick on the ice, and then excuse me, the whole team would shout it back.
Yep.
And so when my dad died, the book was still being written, and I was pretty well into it. But when he got sick, people were like, "I loved you, Dad. I remember his hockey commandments." And I'm thinking to myself, Josh, 30 years later, and every single one of his hockey players who heard he was sick mentioned the Ten Commandments, which got me thinking, okay, that was my dad's contribution, right? That everyone remembered his commandments, and like in 30 years, what would I want my kids to remember? And so
Right.
I tied in my kind of just simple, be kind, never give up, expect
Yeah.
less. Half of them I learned from my dad just by watching him, and I think your kids will do the same. Just look at what you're doing now. You're an entrepreneur.
Yep.
You're an incredible motivational speaker. You're obviously very kind and gentle. I know you're. I don't even know you, but I know in the conversations we have, you're extremely generous. Those are the things that your kids are going to see.
Yeah.
You're not doing things just to do them to make yourself look good. You're doing them because you care.
Right.
And that's just, kids are smart. They pick that stuff up.
Yeah. Your dad, he won up to John Wooden. Who, so because John Wooden had 7 and your dad went with 10, and it's page 249. You were off by a page.
Okay, actually, my dad had it was called the 10 Commandments of Hockey, but there were actually 29.
Okay.
Yeah,
But
there was like, yeah,
the 10 here are: never give up, be kind, forgive others, be yourself, always give more, be mindful, expect less, never make excuses, be grateful, and forgive yourself.
yeah,
Those are some pretty good. Those are some pretty good rules to go by. And I only give that as a teaser. I'm not giving away all the secret sauce because you have a chapter on each of them. So
yeah.
people, if you want to see what that's about and what that means, then you have to buy the book and you have to read it, which I'm gonna do with some time here. One of the things that's really cool about this Build Your Life Resume idea that just came in my head to do this. So far, all my guests have written a book, and I have done a terrible job of reading in the last couple of years. So Joe Baffia's book, like I told you, a little bit easier, 94 pages. I've gotten through it.
I read it. Yeah,
It's right here. It's a good read. Makes me want to go out and buy a vacation home. And he put a post this weekend that he was beachside. And for anybody that wants a cool beach vacation house, he's got one in North Carolina with 2 Peloton bikes and a workout room, which is a neat little place, spice of life. But you're spot on. Like to get a team to buy into, believe, and repeat today it's tough. Anybody, like, just getting people on board with the mission that is that's noble, that could make a difference. And that's not just hockey. That's just in life in general. That's just in work. One of the hardest things that I'm up against with folks is like, I know a third of the people I talk to are going to just brush me off.
Mm-hmm.
They're just going to be like, it doesn't matter what I say. I could have $1 million check waiting for them at the end. They're still going to sleep.
Yeah.
And I've got a third of people that they're in good shape. They're doing all right. And then there's this third on the fence that they're dealing with some challenges or trials or tribulations. That's the third I want to get into. I always try it. I don't want to get to everybody. I just want to get to the magic quadrant in the middle. That's not going to sway over to the sleep side. They're going to go to the active energy side, and they're going to get through some stuff. And I do that, in trying. You're right. It's one of those natural efforts, but it's one of those things that I think about sometimes. I just go, is there an easier way for me to communicate? Hey, did you see that, or how did you do it? But you don't want to do it by being that humble bragger at the same point in time, right? But
you need
that's the hard part. Yeah.
Because I don't like book. I mean, I do. I'm a huge reader. I read everything. I mean, I'll read 30, 40, 50 books a year, but you can tell quickly into a book, like, what not what the motivation is behind the author, but you can tell if they're
Yeah.
forcing it, if they're just trying to make money. And
Yeah.
your story is like, you'd back up your stories with genuine,
Yeah.
stories, and they're relatable.
Yeah.
So people can see through that. So I just think you need a book because
Yeah.
that's where you reach that sweet spot of the people who are looking. I couldn't believe, like, I was hopeful that my book would have a message that people would relate to, but I was kind of blown away by the reaction of a lot of, not just friends either, just strangers who said, I could relate to a lot of what you wrote. And that's all you can ask for, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, you got, like we talked yesterday, you've got actual sponsors in your book. Like I don't see bestsellers that have sponsors. When you talk about great is good is the enemy of great, but Colin's book, that's the most written book, most read book in the world in history and business. Um, it he doesn't have sponsors. You got sponsors in the back of your book. You got Jesse Itzler to who's the Build Your Life Resume founder and someone that's has accumulated great wealth, not just financially, but personally in life, just living life to the fullest. You
Yeah.
got a glowing reference or acknowledgement on the back of your book. Like that says something. And if my memory is correct, his father had Alzheimer's and passed away.
Yep. Yep. That's right. Yeah.
So,
But
touching.
Jason's a good example. He could be a phony. He could be a total phony, right?
Oh yeah.
He's got enough money to not give a crap. This calendar club, this Build Your Life Resume. Yeah, I know it's a business for him, but he's so passionate about it. Like,
Yeah.
it's just I love it. I don't know him that well, and neither one of us do, but
Right.
I respect him and I appreciate his genuineness.
So yeah, but I mean, you figure out let's just conservatively, like when you talk about, when we talk about genuine, let's say he's worth let's say he bills out, he probably gets 50 grand, right? For a keynote, an hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
He gives us 12 hours a year, virtual, but it's pretty powerful virtual stuff.
Yeah.
So that's a $600,000 value for the members that we all get them. And there's only a couple hundred members that get there because of the timing of everything. So when you look at what the investment is and what they probably make, it's not a moneymaker for them.
No.
So it sounds like, $1,500, 1,500 people, even at $1,000 a year, the expense, the putting into technology, everything else, he's not doing it for the money. And he says it. And, and I tell some people, he's like, oh, he's making all this money. I'm like, who's he making money? I mean, when we had the CEO of Dude Wipes, he's a member, but he got him for an hour. Like, I can't do that. I can't get that. I can't get that guy for an hour. So, what's that worth? What's it cost? What's he got to give? Because you always got to do something to get something here in the world. So
he's got a team too. It's not just him. He's got a full team working full time on the calendar club.
Right. And you're right. He could, and he still flies commercial. He had a private jet company, and you see him flying with his family, flying commercial, on occasion. It's like, wow, this guy's, he's the real deal and grounded.
I mean, not only that, his wife is the owner of Spanx, she just sold it. I mean, they're billionaires. So
yeah,
to be able to have access to a billionaire in his mindset, and he's just he doesn't hold back. He doesn't sugarcoat anything.
No,
and he says stuff that you don't always agree with too. He'll say things like, that call that we listened to the other day, he's like, I'm so pissed that my kid didn't get into that school, not because he wasn't good enough, but because the way they handled it, they didn't handle it well. And he's like, that's it. She's on my blacklist forever. Like, I don't know if I agree with that, but he's just like throwing it out there. He's like, hey, this is how I feel.
It's funny, and we're just going off on a tangent on this. I listened to that same thing. I initially had the exact same feeling that he had, thinking about, well, I just had a friend of mine that had shared with me that they had tried to get their child into a private school, and it wasn't about money. It wasn't about anything. And the way that they went about basically telling that kid that they weren't good enough to be in the school. I heard it, and I'm like, oh my God, I heard this from a friend, and I hear this from Jesse. And I'm internally, I'm getting angry because part of what I talk about with regard to especially in education institutions is something that I stole from the president of Southern New Hampshire University, which he says talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. And so when I heard that story from Jesse, I'm like, that's right. Blackball him for life. Put him, don't let him in the club. We don't want him. We don't want, and then I thought about it and I'm like, well, that first of all, that wouldn't be very awesome. And then second of all, sometimes we should have a difficult conversation, right? And call the person on it. And I don't know if he did or not, but he was fired up and emotional. And the reality is, I think I think in today's world, we have such a hard time of just being ourselves. I mean, if you talk about, I mean, here's the reality: you talk about politics, 50% of the people you're going to get upset they're going to get upset with you, and they're not just going to get upset with you. They're going to cease a lifetime friendship with you over how you vote. Like, think about all of the hostility over, Republican or Democrat. So I don't talk politics. I don't even talk politics in my house. I've got my feelings. They're great. I think it's the right decision that I have with the information I have, and I'm not going to try to force my way onto you. But if you want to be that person, I'm probably going to talk to you less. And then go religion, right?
No, I've lost friends since
Yeah.
the last election.
Yep.
And I don't really get it. I don't really understand why we can't just disagree and just be friends. But it's so toxic.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want that in my life, Josh. And that was one of the things that when my dad got sick, I was like, I tried to unload all my unhealthy negative relationships. What's the point? What am I investing my energy into these relationships? They're toxic.
Yeah.
I don't want any part of that.
So this was one of the things that happened with my dad after he started to get sick, and I didn't know. I obviously didn't know the severity of it. My dad had this way about himself where he kind of had these places, and this was going back 30 years, where he would have his hangout spots. He used to smoke a pipe, Captain Black. He'd dip it in there and stick it, and then he went to cigars. He chewed Red Man like he was just a big tobacco. If he couldn't chew it or smoke it, he didn't want it. And so my mother would be like, "You're not doing that in the house." So he started a habit in the mid 80s where he'd go out and he'd park somewhere and he'd read the newspaper. And so, but then when he was living on his own, he didn't have to do all that stuff. But when he started to get dementia, he started going to random places and parking. And so people would call me and they'd be like, "Hey, Dad was sitting in my parking lot for an hour. What was he doing?" I said, "Probably reading the paper." And it was a trigger to me about my dad and what helps me today, which is I would ask my dad, because he was a ferocious reader. I mean, you always wanted him on your team with Trivial Pursuit. And people go, "What's Trivial Pursuit?" It's a pie chart with different chapters, and it was a board game, and you couldn't Google the answers. So you needed really smart people that read, dictionaries, encyclopedias, and anything they could find. And so I thought my dad was just a very, just really wanting to soak everything in. And one day I can remember asking him when I was in my 20s, and I said, "Dad, I can't help but notice every day you read the Herald and the Globe." I said, "They're two very different newspapers. So the Boston Herald and the Boston Globe, they're both Boston-based newspapers, but the articles are both like Fox and CNN or anything else. They both have their own version of the same story." And so I remember asking my father, I said, "Dad, why do you, they both have the same stories?" And he said, "But they have different views. And if I don't look at both views," he said, "if I look at both views, I'll go somewhere in the middle. Most likely I'll find something in the middle. But if I believe everything that the Globe writes, or if I believe everything that the Herald writes, first of all, I'm going to be very boring. And I'm only going to be in a certain group, clientele of people, and I don't want that. I want to be able to have dialogue. I want to be able to have discussion, and I want to be able to have my viewpoint, not somebody else's viewpoint." And that was how he wrote his own narrative, right? And that's the challenge that people don't have today. It's like we get done with this podcast, and someone puts a post and says, "Mark and Josh sucked" on Facebook.
Yeah.
All of their people, and for those watching and listening, don't do that. That was just a joke. That was an example. We're awesome. That's why it's Be Awesome podcast. But like, so few people actually take that stance, myself included. Sometimes I go down rabbit holes just like anybody else.
Yeah.
But it's hard, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when I don't know if you can remember the first friend that you lost a friendship with over a political viewpoint. And mine was an assumption. Mine was just a blind assumption that, based on something I said, obviously made me one side or the other. And the person's like, "Done. We're not having a conversation any further." But it hurts, right?
Yeah, it does. It's sad.
So
But again, 10 years ago, I'd be pissed at that person and bitter. Now I'm just like, yeah,
It's the 50 thing. I'm closing in on 50, and I don't worry as much about it. And I realize that the world is a whole lot bigger with a whole lot more awesome people than not awesome people. So I just need to move on to the next,
yeah,
the next awesome person. I mean, that's been this learning lesson so far with this we'll call it experiment. I actually have, one or two members that they have a story that just hasn't been written yet, and I want to help them, kind of like you're going to help me on this
yeah,
journey with the book. It's like there's so many great people out there that to focus on that negative person in your life, or negative people that obviously have something going on, right?
yeah,
They have something going on. When you talk about being a salesman, it's like you talk about all the times you get hung up on. How many times have you ever been hung up on? Honest, off topic completely, but I ask salespeople this: how many times do you get hung up on by people when you're able to actually tell them the story that you want to tell them? Like, how that never happens. People hang up on salespeople because the last salesperson did a really bad job and they're angry, or they just got a bad diagnosis with something. You don't actually get to talk to them. I always tell salespeople, it's not you, it's something else, and
right.
to focus on that reality of life. So, because that's how people can be, not good people with sales folks,
Well,
unfortunately, because
do you feel,
bad behavior.
here I am interviewing you, but do you feel once your dad got sick, he's not the
Yeah.
dad that you once knew, but how did your mindset change? How did your outlook on the rest of your life? You're almost 50, I'm 50, like combined with Jesse's program, like, I mean, has it been life-changing, or have you
Yes.
changed your life because of your dad's diagnosis and sickness?
I'd be lying if I said I haven't struggled for the last 2.5 years, and I can't blame it on COVID. I have struggled with, um, what does the rest of my life look like? I've struggled with what more could I do for my dad? I'm in a little bit of a different situation regarding my ability to help my father. Fortunately, as of today, right now, he's in a great place. Um, um, and I've struggled. I share with people all the time. I've had 15 years of therapy. I've been away from it for a little bit. I'm probably going to be going back to it because I, like everybody, have demons and difficulties
Mhm.
that creep up on me. And I haven't gone out and done the stereotypical buy a Corvette when you have a midlife crisis, but I'm probably in some form of that, with a 4-year-old. That's a hard, like, I when I had a 4-year-old, the last time I had a 4-year-old, I was in my barely mid 30s. Now I'm creeping up on 50, and it's like Amy and I joke that Chance is going to be going to day school, country day school, in a couple of weeks. And it's the same country day school that Danny went to 11 years ago. And we were the average couple, right?
Mhm.
And we'll joke and be like, yeah, they're just going to think we're Chance's grandparents.
Yeah,
And so when we make those comments, we don't realize what it does in our brain, how that reality, and we go, man, am I really that old? Do I really need to have this short amount of time? And your dad was in his 80s, if I
yeah,
remember correctly, when he was sick. My dad was diagnosed when he was barely 70.
yeah, it's young.
So, my dad's 76 years old. Like,
Right,
it's not like my grandmother who's 100.
right,
And she's active and living at home still. She lives with my mother and needs a lot of care, but um, it's not. So my head, most days I'm in a really tough spot. I have a lot of fog in my head trying to figure out, okay, what do I do? How do I do it? And how do I get to where I want to go? It's kind of like
mhm,
I talked to my life insurance. For those of you that are any age, you should have life insurance. And I'm not a life insurance salesperson, but maybe I should get a sponsorship for
that's
that
fine.
along with Storyworth. But I have life insurance. But when I talk to and I'm overdue to talk to him by 6 months, Bob Mance, my guy, um, he says, "What do you want your life to look like in 20 years?" Right? And I go, I'm sitting here saying happy. I want to be happy, and I need to figure out what that is. And I don't necessarily know what that is right now.
Yeah,
But my dad is, I go most days feeling guilty. I have a lot of guilt. I have a lot of feeling like I wish I did things a whole lot differently, and trying to get rid of that remorse is very difficult. And that's why I say, I more likely than not need to go back and see my good friend who I get to confide in once a week for an hour, that he's not allowed to say anything to anyone. So the trust tree. But
I'm
I
not
don't.
sure. So it's easy for me to say, let go of the guilt, let go of the regret. I think you've been a good son, but you have to ask yourself, like, how is it helping you? How's
It's not.
It's not.
Yeah.
There's nothing redeemable about guilt or regret or grudges or anything. So, I mean,
did you have it when you were in it? Like when your dad was still here, did you ever feel like guilty? Like when he was in the nursing home, were you just like, I'm here and I get to be out? And
no, I didn't have that. Like I said, I spent a lot of time with him, and every day was a gift. So I was just, I was more reacting. I wasn't really thinking about the guilt, and the guilt was basically, obviously, I wish I had spent more quality time with him. When your 15-year-old is in the throes of growing up, when he's between 7 and 15, you're just so busy that of course you wish you had spent more time with your dad and or your parents. But I think my regret was really just, again, not asking those questions.
Yeah.
The regret was not knowing him the way I
Right.
thought I should have known him, and hopefully others can heed this message and start to get to know their parents. But
yeah,
I didn't have that regret. I was truly, I mean, compared to my brothers, I think we had a different experience. I mean, I was literally appreciative every single day that I got to have a cup of coffee with him.
Yeah.
I was.
I think that's, I think that.
Don't get me wrong.
That
at the same time, I'm praying to God that God takes him peacefully into sleep every single day.
Yeah.
So I'm having both thoughts. I'm like, please God, please take him peacefully tonight.
Yes.
But at the same time, I'm like, please God, let me have one more cup of coffee with him.
Right.
That's really how it was for me every day.
So I didn't know my father was being moved recently, and I went to go visit him, and I walked in and did as I normally do, sign in and did all that stuff. And the director comes running out, and she says, "Who are you here to see?" And I said, "My dad," and I said his name. And she just looked at me and she goes, "I'm so sorry." And I immediately had this feeling, and I just go, "Don't you tell me he's dead. Don't tell me he's dead."
Yeah. Wow.
And I don't know if it was because I didn't let her finish, because I heard "I'm so sorry" that I just stopped her from her saying he was discharged and went someplace else. And that was the first time that I was like, I'm in the same boat you are. I don't wish my father dead, but I want him to, I want my father to live in peace, hopefully in some form of an afterlife or something else, because he's not living his life. He's just, so I know that my brain, as much as I fight saying that, I know there's times in my brain that I go, I wish that he could be at peace. And that's most likely with his parents and whatever that is. But when that happened, I was like, my whole life just froze for a second. And I'm like, no, I'll take him closing the door on me. I'll take him not knowing who I am. I'll take being able to put my arm around him. I'll take trying to say I love him. I'll take all these things as long as I can, for as long as I can. I, sometimes I think it's selfish, but that's, I'm with, that's, yeah. And I think my guilt or regret is that I got to have coffee. We had coffee every day for years, for better part of 15 years. We would have coffee just about every single day. He'd come to my house, or we'd be at work or whatever. My regret or guilt is that I didn't take enough advantage, kind of like what you're saying. I didn't ask the questions. Like, we were there, but I don't know that we were always present. And that's what I have my challenge with. So, but no, this has been great. It's been an hour and 10 minutes. I can't believe we just
I can't either. Yeah.
threw off the whole thing.
I feel like we just scratched the surface here,
Yeah, no, well, we'll have to get you back on. Maybe we'll do a book update or do something. But I definitely want to thank you for sharing, and kind of went deep with a bunch of things here, which was kind of cool. And Andrew Appleton, who was an awesome follower and supporter, said, thanks for this. My mother is close to passing, and I was able to visit her recently, maybe for the last time. Andrew, sorry, I don't know that I even knew your mom was sick. So sorry you're going through that, my friend. Andrew's actually a pretty phenomenal human being all around, does a whole bunch of cool stuff, but Marine, and he just recently flew one of now only 3 code talkers to Washington, D.C.
Wow.
So he's doing a lot with the 80th anniversary of code talkers. So Andrew, hope you maybe get to see your mom one more time. But if it was the last time, I hope it was a good one. And sorry to hear that.
To Andrew and to yourself, Josh, I would say it's okay to think that. I mean, I think it's really okay to have those thoughts of, it's time. They lived a good life, and this isn't the life that they're not living right now. And it's okay to say, it's time to take from God.
Yeah.
Like her. Yeah, for sure. It's tough.
Yeah. I actually, I had that conversation with my father's father. And I was in the room when my grandfather passed away. I was the only person there.
Yeah.
And I can remember, it's inevitable, right?
Yeah.
We're all going. Live your dash,
Yeah.
But I remember, as hard as it was, and as much as I wanted my grandpa to be there and come around and everything else, you look and you go, there's no fixing it. And that's the thing that I'll try to end this conversation with until we have our next one. But that's the biggest challenge for me, is my brain fairly often, I have to be reeled back in by Amy, because my brain, I'll say something like my dad's going to, because physically he's there, right? He's still strong. He's still moving around and everything. And so my brain will say, hey, if I keep going to see him and I see him every day and I talk to him, maybe something will trigger and come back. Maybe something will snap, and he'll give me one more day of a conversation, or be someone I can ask a question to. And so my brain just doesn't. My brain sometimes has an inability to function that says, this is it. Like, he's not going to get better. He's not going to come out of this. He's not going to remember my name. He's not going to know who I am. He's gone, and that's the hardest part. Is telling yourself the reality of the finality. And it's not something I wish on anybody. And most people don't know that it's possible to happen. So, but hey, thank you for writing the book. I can't wait to dig in. I got the 10 Commandments right in front of me. While I didn't know your dad, it's obvious he was a pretty awesome human being, and did some amazing things. And for you to share your story, and his story is something of leaving a legacy, not just for your kids, but for anybody that chooses to give it a read. So appreciate you, my friend. And I look forward to this new friendship. We'll have to get David Cooks on the line one of these days. We'll have, he said he was going to try to listen in, but busy guy's got all sorts of stuff going on. So we'll probably listen to the recording.
That's all good. Yeah. Let's offline. We'll schedule a time to get together and map out this book.
Well, I told him about JetBlue flying from Milwaukee to Boston direct for short money, that he didn't have an excuse. So now he's just got to get himself up and going and get out here. So, so this is going to wrap up this episode. This was a pretty strong one. It hits close to home. If you don't know about Alzheimer's and dementia, even though you don't have a family member, pay attention. Think about people that may have gone through it. Ask questions. It isn't something that, I don't know that they have a clear definition on it, or they say it skips generations and it's a higher likelihood for males, and all the other statistics and things that you might read, or people that might say, do some homework, and also, one of the things that people that are going through it in the early stages, the importance of patience and not correcting the person that's got it. So if your parent or friend says the sky is purple, go with it. It doesn't matter.
That's a great point. I want to plug my friend's book. It's The Stranger You Love on Amazon, and it is absolutely, to me, one of the most crucial books you can read about Alzheimer's. It's just very, like, if you want to know the basics of Alzheimer's, if you want to know the language of caring, if you want to hear stories, like, if I wish I had the book when my dad was diagnosed, because it really does map out what are the considerations you have to talk about with your family, with your loved one, and It's a good book. It's a very helpful book. But you're absolutely right. Just don't correct them.
Yep.
Don't get mad at them.
Yep.
No.
And yeah, and if they remember something, don't think they're going to remember everything.
Yeah.
Even in those early stages. But yeah, and to know,
Yeah.
if you start to see things that trigger, make sure that they get checked out and make sure that you stay on top of it. Not just give them the responsibility of doing it themselves, because when people are diagnosed with it, they don't want to realize it or admit to it. And many people that are diagnosed with it, they don't know what it is because they don't know anything about it. So they're not at the capacity of understanding the severity or how quick or how slow it could happen. So we could give a couple of hours of what to do and what not to do. And believe me, when I tell you not to do or do something, I did it all. So I went through it. I made all the mistakes. I made the corrections until I knew I wasn't supposed to, and all that stuff. And it is a lot. If you could have a more pleasant experience, and that's a hard way to say it, but if you could have an experience where you could have conversations about purple sky and flying elephants or whatever is on their mind, just do it. Just go with it, because that's what's in their head, and you're not going to tell them otherwise. It's not like your kids that are just rebellious. It's that their brain just doesn't have the capability, the cognitive function, or they have hallucinations, or they're seeing things that just aren't there. And so you just got to roll with it. So can't thank you enough, my friend. I'm going to do, so we got Chris Martinetti gave us a great rating and review. I think we're up to 69 5-star rating and reviews. This is where we close out the episode, and I do my shameless plug for people that listen and watch to go on Apple Podcast or Spotify or your favorite podcast platform, subscribe on YouTube. But everybody that gives a 5-star rating and review, I give something to you. So if you watch this episode, listen to this episode, and you give a 5-star rating and review, you want to learn about what life is like with a parent or family member or friend that has Alzheimer's and the impact that it has, in sharing your life story. This is the book. It's 10 Days with Dad. And just as I did with Joe Bafia, 5-star rating and review, send me a message with your address. I'm going to take care of 5 of these copies of this book so you can read it with me. So please do submit the ratings and reviews. I hope this was a great episode for you. If it's not a 5-star rating and review, tell me. Don't tell your friends. Tell me. Let's see if we can fix it. And I want to earn it. I don't want you to just put a bad rating and review for putting a bad rating and review. That's my way of getting it. So you can't do that. You're not allowed to. You got to give me a chance to fix it first. So follow us: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. Subscribe, share, help us grow. BYLR members, reach out to me. It's just that easy. There was no formal interview. Said I wanted to be on the podcast. Let's pick a day and a time. So in the meantime, if you can be anything, be awesome. Have a great day.